The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the well-worn trail, jostling Delilah Thompson against the hard wooden seat. She winced, fresh pain shooting through her ribs where the bruises were still raw and tender. Through the small window, she caught her first glimpse of Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, a dusty collection of wooden structures that would soon become her home in this harsh landscape of 1875. Her fingers trembled as they traced the letter in her lap. The paper had grown worn from countless readings during her journey west from Boston. The neat, steady handwriting of Benjamin Miller, her soon-to-be husband, had been her only comfort during the grueling journey. A man she had never met, but had agreed to marry through a mail-order bride arrangement that had seemed her only escape. "Castle Dome coming up, miss," the driver called back. 10 minutes at most." Delilah straightened her simple blue dress, wincing again as the fabric brushed against her injuries. Her father's parting gift. The bruises had blossomed into ugly purple marks across her arms, and she knew similar patterns decorated her back and shoulders beneath her clothing. At 22 years of age, she had finally gathered the courage to flee the only home she had ever known, answering an advertisement for a wife in the Arizona Territory. "Thank you," she called back to the driver, her voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. As they rolled into town, Delilah's stomach knotted with anxiety. What if Benjamin Miller rejected her when he saw her battered condition? What if he proved to be just another violent man? Her letter had described herself as healthy and capable, mentioning nothing of the abuse she had endured. Now she feared the deception might cost her this chance at a new beginning. Castle Dome was larger than she had imagined from Benjamin's descriptions. The main street featured a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and what appeared to be a small hotel. Several side streets branched off, lined with modest homes. In the distance, the Castle Dome mountains rose like silent sentinels against the azure sky. The stagecoach lurched to a halt before the general store. The driver hopped down and opened the door, offering Delilah his weathered hand. "Here we are, miss. Castle Dome." Delilah gathered her small carpetbag and accepted his help, stepping carefully onto the dusty street. Her legs, stiff from the long journey, nearly buckled beneath her. The heat hit her like a physical force, dry and intense in a way Boston's humidity had never prepared her for. "Are you all right, miss?" the driver asked, noticing her unsteadiness. "Yes, thank you. Just tired from the journey," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As the driver unloaded the rest of the luggage for the other passengers, Delilah scanned the small crowd that had gathered to meet the stagecoach. Her heart raced as she searched for a man who might be Benjamin Miller. Then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His stance was relaxed yet alert, like a man accustomed to watching his surroundings. When he spotted her, he straightened, removed his hat, and began walking toward her with purposeful strides. Delilah clutched her bag tighter, suddenly conscious of the visible bruises on her arms. She had tried to cover them with long sleeves, but the Arizona heat had forced her to roll them to her elbows during the journey. "Miss Thompson." His voice was deep but gentle, carrying across the distance between them. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Benjamin Miller, yes, madam." He stood before her now, hat in hand, revealing thick chestnut hair and the kindest hazel eyes she had ever seen. His face was tanned from the sun, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both smiles and hardship. He was older than she had imagined, perhaps 35, but handsome in a rugged way. His gaze flickered to the bruises on her arms, and something dark passed across his features. Not disgust, as she had feared, but a controlled anger that wasn't directed at her. She began, struggling to explain, but her voice failed her. Benjamin stepped closer, his expression softening. "Miss Thompson, Delilah, I'm glad you've arrived safely." His eyes traveled to the bruises again, and his jaw tightened. Then, so quietly that only she could hear, he said, "Those marks end today." The simple declaration, spoken with such certainty, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to make a scene in the middle of town with curious onlookers already watching the mail-order bride's arrival. "Let me help you with your belongings," Benjamin said, louder now. He gestured to her single carpet bag. "Is this all you've brought?" "Yes," she answered. "I didn't have much to bring." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words, because understanding flashed in his eyes. "That's just fine. We can get whatever else you need." He retrieved her small trunk from the stagecoach and carried it effortlessly under one arm while offering her his other. "My wagon's just over there, if you're ready to head to the ranch." Delilah hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his offered arm. The solid strength beneath her fingers was reassuring rather than threatening. "I thought perhaps." She began, uncertain how to express her concerns about immediate marriage to a stranger. Benjamin seemed to read her thoughts. "I've prepared the old foreman's cabin for you. It's small but comfortable, about 50 yards from the main house. I thought you might want some time to settle in before we proceed with any arrangements." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. That's very considerate." "Benjamin, please," he said, guiding her toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 well-groomed horses. "And there's no rush, Delilah. We have time to become acquainted properly." As they walked, several townspeople nodded greetings to Benjamin, their curious gazes lingering on Delilah. She kept her head high despite her discomfort with the attention. "Is it far to your ranch?" she asked as Benjamin helped her onto the wagon seat. "About 7 miles east," he replied, loading her trunk into the back before climbing up beside her. The flying embarks, not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land. Been building it up for 8 years now. As Benjamin flicked the reins and the horses pulled away from town, Delilah felt the weight of watching eyes fade. The vastness of the Arizona landscape opened before them, rolling hills dotted with scrubby vegetation, distant mountains, and a sky so immense it seemed to swallow the horizon. Benjamin drove in companionable silence for several minutes before speaking again. "I know this isn't easy, coming all this way to marry a stranger. I appreciate your courage, Delilah." She glanced at his profile, strong and steady as he watched the trail. "I should be honest with you," she said, finding a bravery she hadn't known she possessed. "I came west to escape. My father." Her voice faltered. "You don't need to explain," Benjamin said quietly, "but if you ever want to talk about it, I'm a good listener." Delilah nodded, grateful for his understanding. As the wagon rolled onward, she studied him surreptitiously. His hands were calloused but handled the reins with a gentle touch. The gun on his hip spoke of the dangers of frontier life, yet there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, seeking safer conversation. Benjamin's face brightened. "The Flying M runs about 2,000 head of cattle. I've got good grazing land and 3 dependable water sources. Built the house myself, though it took 3 years to get it right." Pride colored his voice. "Got 4 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, good men, all of them. Mrs. Abernathy comes up from town 3 days a week to help with cooking and cleaning." "It sounds like you've built something substantial," Delilah observed. "Been trying to," he agreed. "But a house needs a family to be a home." He said it matter-of-factly, without pressure or expectation. The wagon crested a small rise and Benjamin pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. The flying M. Delilah gasped softly at the sight. The ranch spread across a verdant valley, surprisingly green amidst the surrounding arid landscape. A substantial two-story house of timber and stone stood as the centerpiece, with several outbuildings arranged nearby. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Benjamin smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, erasing years of hardship. "I'm glad you think so. I hope you'll come to feel at home here." They continued down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, Delilah noticed a small cabin set apart from the main house, just as Benjamin had described. "That'll be your place for now," he said, nodding toward it. "I had Mrs. Abernathy fix it up nice. There's a lock on the door, the key will be yours alone." The thoughtfulness of this provision, privacy, security, and choice moved Delilah deeply. When they pulled up to the main house, a tall, lanky man emerged from one of the outbuildings. "That's Thomas, my foreman," Benjamin explained. "The others are probably out with the herd." Thomas approached, removing his hat as he neared. "Afternoon, Mr. Miller. This must be Miss Thompson." "Indeed it is," Benjamin confirmed, helping Delilah down from the wagon. "Delilah, this is Thomas Riley, been with me since I started this place." "Pleasure to meet you, madam," Thomas said, his manner respectful. If he noticed her bruises, he gave no indication. "We're all mighty pleased you've come." "Thank you, Mr. Riley," Delilah replied, finding his straightforward welcome comforting. "Thomas, would you mind bringing Miss Thompson's trunk to the foreman's cabin? I'd like to show her around a bit before supper." "Of course, boss." Thomas moved to retrieve her trunk. Benjamin guided Delilah toward the main house. "Thought you might like to see where we take our meals, even if you're staying in the cabin." The house was surprisingly cool inside after the heat of the day. The main floor consisted of a spacious living area with sturdy, handcrafted furniture, a dining room that could seat 8 comfortably, and a well-appointed kitchen. Benjamin had clearly invested care in creating a proper home. "It's lovely," Delilah said, running her fingers along a polished oak table. "Mrs. Abernathy keeps it tidy, but it could use a woman's touch," Benjamin admitted. "Though I don't mean to presume, no, I understand," Delilah assured him, "and I would like to contribute once I'm settled." Benjamin nodded, relieved. "Would you like to see upstairs?" Delilah hesitated, and he quickly added, "Just so you know the layout. It's your home too now, or it will be if you decide to stay." "Yes, I'd like to see it," she said, appreciating how carefully he navigated their unusual situation. The upper floor had 4 bedrooms. Benjamin's was the largest, simply furnished with a large bed, dresser, wardrobe, and desk. 2 smaller rooms remained empty, and the 4th had been converted to a small library. "I like to read on winter evenings," Benjamin explained, almost apologetically, as he showed her the shelves lined with books. "So do I," Delilah said, surprised to find such a collection in a frontier home. "My father considered it a waste of time for women." Something hardened in Benjamin's expression, but his voice remained gentle. "Well, you're welcome to read anything here that interests you." After the tour, Benjamin walked her to the foreman's cabin where Thomas had deposited her trunk. The small building was clean and cozy, with a comfortable bed, small table and chairs, a basin for washing, and even a small pot-bellied stove. "It gets cold at night, even in summer," Benjamin explained. "There's firewood stacked around back. I can show you how to build a proper fire if you need." "Thank you. This is more than I expected," Delilah said, truly touched by his consideration. Benjamin handed her a key. "This is yours. No one will enter without your invitation, myself included." Delilah took the key, its weight in her palm representing a freedom she had never known. "Thank you, Benjamin. We take supper at 6 in the main house. I'll come by to walk you over if that's agreeable." "Yes, that would be fine." With a tip of his hat, Benjamin left her to settle in. Alone in the cabin, Delilah sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. For the first time since leaving Boston, she allowed herself to cry not from fear or pain, but from a tentative hope that perhaps she had found safety at last. She unpacked her meager belongings, changed her dress, and attempted to make herself presentable for dinner. The bruises on her arms were impossible to hide completely in the heat, but she did her best with a lightweight shawl. As promised, Benjamin knocked on her door at 5:45. His hair was damp, freshly washed, and he'd changed into a clean shirt. The effort he'd made touched her. "The ranch hands take their meals in the bunkhouse," he explained as they walked. "So it'll just be us tonight. Mrs. Abernathy left a stew simmering before heading back to town." Dinner was a simple but delicious affair. Benjamin served her himself, then took a seat across the table rather than at the head, minimizing the distance between them. "I hope the cabin is comfortable," he said as they ate. "Very much so. It's perfect, truly." They ate in silence for a moment before Benjamin spoke again. "I should tell you something about myself, Delilah, something I didn't mention in my letters." She tensed slightly, fork paused midway to her mouth. "I was married before," he said quietly. "Her name was Margaret. She died 5 years ago along with our unborn child from a fever that swept through the territory." "I'm so sorry," Delilah said, her heart aching for his loss. Benjamin nodded, accepting her sympathy. "I'm not looking to replace her. I want you to know that. But after 5 years alone, I realized I wasn't meant to live in solitude. I want companionship, a family." He met her eyes directly. "I want you to know what you're considering." "I appreciate your honesty," she replied, "and I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He seemed to debate with himself before continuing. "May I ask you something, Delilah? You don't have to answer if you don't wish to. You may ask. Those bruises, was it just your father, or was there a husband as well?" Delilah set down her fork, composing herself. "Just my father. He became different after my mother died when I was 12. The drinking made it worse." She lifted her chin slightly. "I've never been married." Benjamin's expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Not directed at her, but at the man who had marked her body with his violence. "No man has the right to harm a woman," he said, his voice low and firm. "Not a father, not a husband, not ever." "You truly believe that?" she asked, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "With every fiber of my being," he affirmed. "My own father taught me that a man's strength is for protecting those he cares for, not for dominance or control." Delilah felt something within her unclench, slightly a fear she had carried for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of her being. "I should also be honest with you," she said after a moment. "I answered your advertisement because I needed to escape. I had no other options." She looked down at her plate. "I don't know if I'll make a good wife, Benjamin. I don't know if I can be what you're hoping for." "All I'm hoping for," he replied gently, "is that you'll give this place and me a chance. We don't need to rush anything. We can take the time to know each other properly. But the arrangement can wait," he finished firmly. "The preacher only comes through Castle Dome once a month anyway. That gives us at least 3 weeks before we'd need to decide." Delilah felt relief wash through her. "Thank you." "You're very kind." Benjamin shook his head. "Not kind, just decent." He smiled slightly. "Though I won't deny I hope you'll come to care for this place and maybe for me in time." The honesty in his words, devoid of demands or expectations, gave Delilah her first real sense of hope since arriving. As the days passed, Delilah began to establish a routine at the Flying M. Each morning, she joined Benjamin for breakfast in the main house. He would tell her about his plans for the day while she served them both coffee and the biscuits she'd learned to make from Mrs. Abernathy. Mrs. Abernathy herself was a revelation to Delilah, a stout, no-nonsense widow of 50 who treated Benjamin with fond exasperation and took Delilah under her wing without prying into her past. "Men need managing," she told Delilah on her third day at the ranch as they kneaded bread together in the kitchen. "Even the good ones like Mr. Miller, but that one's worth the trouble, treats his horses, his cattle, and his people right." "He seems to," Delilah agreed cautiously. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a shrewd look. "I see those marks on you, child. Don't worry, I'm not asking. But I will say this, I've known Benjamin Miller for 8 years, and I've never seen him raise his hand in anger against anyone who didn't deserve it, and certainly never against a woman." The simple testimony, offered without solicitation, eased another layer of Delilah's constant vigilance. After breakfast each morning, Benjamin would ride out to tend to ranch business, sometimes not returning until dusk. Delilah spent her days learning the rhythms of the ranch, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, and gradually exploring her surroundings. The physical marks of her father's abuse began to fade. The bruises changed from angry purple to yellowish green, then slowly disappeared altogether. As they vanished from her skin, Delilah felt a corresponding lightening of her spirit. She began to sleep through the night without starting at every sound. Her appetite returned. She found herself smiling more often. 1 week into her stay, Benjamin knocked on her cabin door in the late afternoon. "I thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he suggested when she opened the door. "There's a spot I'd like to show you if you're willing to ride." "I don't know how," Delilah admitted. "We lived in the city, and my father thought horseback riding unsuitable for women." Something flashed in Benjamin's eyes that controlled anger she'd seen before when her father was mentioned, but his voice remained even. "Would you like to learn? I have a gentle mare that would suit a beginner." "I'd like that very much," she said, surprising herself with her eagerness. Benjamin brought a chestnut mare named Penny to the corral and spent an hour patiently teaching Delilah the basics of riding. His hands were respectful when he helped her mount, and he maintained a proper distance as he instructed her. "You're a natural," he encouraged as she walked the horse in a circle, gradually growing comfortable with the motion. "It's exhilarating," she admitted, feeling a freedom she'd never experienced. "Though I don't think I'm ready for more than a walk just yet." "That's fine. We'll go slow, and I'll lead Penny if you like." They set out from the ranch, Benjamin on his stallion named Thunder, leading Penny by a lead rope. He guided them along a gentle trail that wound through a grove of cottonwoods following a small creek. "This water makes all the difference," Benjamin explained. "Without it, this land would be much like the desert around it, but the creek feeds the valley year-round, even in drought years." After riding for about half an hour, they came to a small mesa overlooking the ranch. Benjamin helped Delilah dismount and tied the horses to a nearby tree. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, gesturing toward the vista before them. From this vantage point, the entire Flying M spread out below them. The house and outbuildings looked like miniatures, and the cattle appeared as dark specks against the green pastures. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in a golden glow. "It's breathtaking," Delilah said, genuinely awed by the beauty. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think," Benjamin admitted. "Helps put things in perspective." They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, absorbing the peaceful scene. "May I ask you something?" Delilah said finally. Anything. Why did you choose me? From the responses to your advertisement, I mean. I'm sure there were others. Benjamin considered her question carefully. Your letter was honest, not trying to impress or exaggerate. You wrote about wanting peace and partnership, not romance or riches. He smiled slightly. And you mentioned loving books. That seemed important somehow. I didn't mention everything, she said quietly, thinking of the bruises she'd arrived with. None of us can put our whole selves into a letter, he replied. The important parts were there. As they stood side by side, a wild rabbit darted from the brush nearby, startling them both. Benjamin's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, then relaxed when he identified the source of the disturbance. Delilah, however, had flinched violently, raising her arm as if to ward off a blow. The involuntary reaction hung between them for a moment. Benjamin's expression softened with understanding. Delilah, he said gently, I will never raise my hand to you, not in anger, not for any reason. I give you my word. She lowered her arm slowly, embarrassed by her instinctive response. I know that. Logically, I do, but my body remembers differently. I understand. And somehow, looking into his eyes, she believed he truly did. Time will help, and you never need to apologize for protecting yourself. As they rode back to the ranch, Delilah felt a shift in her relationship with Benjamin, not a dramatic change, but a deepening of trust. He had seen her fear and met it with compassion rather than offense or impatience. That evening, for the first time, she joined him on the porch after supper. They sat in rocking chairs as darkness fell, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and watching the stars appear in the vast Arizona sky. It's so different from Boston, she observed. There, the buildings and gas lamps hide most of the stars. First time I saw this sky, I couldn't believe there were so many stars in creation, Benjamin agreed. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way. They rocked in silence for a while longer before Benjamin spoke again. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you've been helping with the household accounts. Just a little, Delilah said. I noticed she was struggling with some of the figures, and I've always had a head for numbers. She says you straightened out 3 months of ledgers in an afternoon. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. It wasn't difficult, just time-consuming. My father insisted I learn bookkeeping to help with his business. Was that the only good thing he insisted on? Benjamin asked quietly. Perhaps, she admitted. Though he did ensure I received a proper education. Boston has excellent schools for girls. Would you be willing to look at the ranch accounts? I keep records, but I've never been skilled with figures. I'd be happy to, she said, pleased to have a way to contribute. The following day, Benjamin brought several leather-bound ledgers to the main house after breakfast. These are a mess, he admitted ruefully. I know what I own and what I owe, but the details get jumbled. Delilah spent the day immersed in the financial records of the Flying M. By late afternoon, she had organized months of scattered entries, categorized expenses, and created a clear picture of the ranch's financial position. When Benjamin returned from checking fence lines with the hands, she presented her findings. You're doing well, she told him, spreading the updated ledgers before him on the dining table. The ranch is profitable, more than you probably realized. However, you're spending too much on supplies from Castle Dome. If you ordered in bulk from Tucson Quarterly instead, you could save considerable money. Benjamin studied her work with obvious admiration. This is remarkable, Delilah. I've never seen it laid out so clearly. I also noticed you're paying top dollar for breeding stock. The Harrigan Ranch north of here sells comparable bulls for 20% less. Old man Harrigan and I have had our differences, Benjamin admitted. But 20% is significant enough to mend fences, I suppose. If you implemented these changes, Delilah continued, warming to the subject, you could increase your annual profits by nearly 30%. Benjamin whistled softly. And I thought I was getting a wife, not a financial advisor. The moment the words left his mouth, they both fell silent, acknowledging the unspoken reality of their arrangement. 2 weeks had passed since Delilah's arrival, and the preacher's monthly visit to Castle Dome was approaching. "Benjamin," Delilah began hesitantly. "It's all right," he interrupted gently. "You don't need to decide anything yet. But the preacher will come again next month and the month after that." Benjamin closed the ledger and met her gaze steadily. "I've come to care for you, Delilah. I won't deny that. But I want you to choose this life. Choose me because you want to, not because of our arrangement or because you have nowhere else to go." Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes at his kindness. "You're a good man, Benjamin Miller." He shook his head slightly. "I'm trying to be. That's all any of us can do." That night, alone in her cabin, Delilah considered her situation with clearer eyes than she had possessed upon her arrival. The bruises from her father were gone, but she knew the deeper wounds would take longer to heal. Benjamin had given her space, time, and respect, gifts she had never expected from any man, let alone one who had essentially purchased her as a bride. And yet, there was more. Over the past 2 weeks, she had come to admire him, his quiet strength, his gentle manner with animals and people alike, his dedication to the land he had claimed as his own. She found herself watching for his return each evening, looking forward to their conversations on the porch. Was it love? Perhaps not yet, but it was a foundation upon which something genuine could grow. The next morning, Delilah was helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare preserves from the small orchard behind the main house when they heard riders approaching. Benjamin had ridden out at dawn with Thomas and 2 other hands to move cattle to a higher pasture, so visitors were unexpected. Mrs. Abernathy wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. "3 riders," she reported. "Don't recognize them." Something in the older woman's tone put Delilah on alert. "Is that unusual?" "Mr. Miller knows most everyone in the county," Mrs. Abernathy replied, "and strangers don't usually find their way to the Flying M by accident." She reached for a shotgun mounted on brackets near the kitchen door. "You stay inside, Miss Thompson." Before Delilah could protest, Mrs. Abernathy had stepped onto the porch, shotgun held casually but ready in her capable hands. Through the window, Delilah watched the 3 riders approach. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and dusty from the trail. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scar across one cheek, pulled his horse to a stop before the porch. "Good morning, madam," he called to Mrs. Abernathy, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "We're looking for Benjamin Miller." "Mr. Miller isn't here at present, Mrs. Abernathy replied, her voice firm. "What's your business with him?" "Private matter," the man said, his gaze wandering over the ranch buildings. "When do you expect him back?" "Hard to say. Could be sundown. You're welcome to leave a message." The man chuckled, sharing a look with his companions. "I think we'll wait. Been riding since dawn and our horses could use the rest." "There's a watering trough by the barn," Mrs. Abernathy said, not moving from her position. "You can water your horses, but then I must ask you to ride on to Castle Dome if you're in need of refreshment. We don't accommodate uninvited guests when the master's away." The man's expression hardened. "That's not very neighborly." "Neither is arriving unannounced with unclear intentions," Mrs. Abernathy countered. Delilah watched the tense exchange with growing apprehension. Something about the leader's voice tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it. The standoff was interrupted by the sound of more riders approaching from the East Benjamin, and his men returning earlier than expected. Delilah felt relief wash through her. The scarred man turned in his saddle, watching as Benjamin and 3 ranch hands rode into the yard. Something in Benjamin's posture changed when he spotted the strangers, a subtle shift to alertness that reminded Delilah he had survived 8 years in this untamed territory. "Gentlemen," Benjamin called as he dismounted, handing his reins to Thomas. "What brings you to the Flying M, Benjamin Miller?" the scarred man asked. "That's right. And you are?" "Name's Dwight Pearson. These are my associates, Cooper and Malone. We represent certain interests in Boston that have business with you." Boston. The word hit Delilah like a physical blow. She pressed closer to the window, straining to hear. Benjamin's expression revealed nothing. "I have no business interests in Boston, Mr. Pearson." "Not business exactly," Pearson replied with a smirk. "More of a family matter. We're looking for a young woman who might have come this way. Delilah Thompson. Her father's mighty concerned about her welfare." Delilah's blood ran cold. How had her father found her? She had been so careful, using her mother's maiden name when purchasing her stage-coach ticket, telling no one of her destination. Outside, Benjamin maintained his composed demeanor. "What's your interest in this woman? Her father hired us to find her and bring her home where she belongs. He's a prominent businessman, worried sick about his daughter." "I see," Benjamin said neutrally. "And how did you come to believe she might be here?" Pearson shifted in his saddle. "Information from the stage line. Passenger matching her description came to Castle Dome. Inquiries led us here." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Pearson, I appreciate your concern for family matters, but I suggest you take your search elsewhere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got ranch business to attend to." The dismissal was clear, but Pearson didn't move. "Now hold on, Miller. We've got reason to believe the girl is here. Her father's offering a substantial reward for her return." "Is he?" Benjamin's voice cooled perceptibly. "And what exactly did this concerned father tell you about why his daughter might have fled across the country?" Pearson's eyes narrowed. "Family disputes ain't our concern. We're just doing a job." "Well, I have work to do as well." Benjamin turned his back on the men, a deliberate insult that made Pearson's face flush with anger. "Listen here, Miller," Pearson snarled, his hand moving toward his holster. "We know the girl's here, and we're not leaving without her. Her father paid good money to get her back." In a motion so smooth it seemed almost casual, Benjamin turned and drew his revolver, leveling it at Pearson before the other man could clear leather. "That would be a mistake, Mr. Pearson," Benjamin said quietly. His 3 ranch hands had also drawn their weapons, training them on Pearson's companions. "I suggest you remove your hand from your gun, nice and slow." Pearson froze, then carefully moved his hand away from his holster. "You're making a big mistake, Miller." "No, you made the mistake when you came to my land threatening me and mine." Benjamin's voice was deadly calm. "Now you have 2 choices. Ride away now and don't return, or attempt to draw that gun and die where you sit." The tension in the yard was palpable. Delilah held her breath, terrified not just of Pearson and his men, but of what might happen to Benjamin if he were forced to kill them. Finally, Pearson raised his hand slightly. "All right, Miller. No need for bloodshed. We're leaving." "Good decision." Benjamin didn't lower his weapon. "Thomas, escort our visitors to the property line. Make sure they're headed toward Castle Dome, not circling back." Thomas nodded, still covering the men with his rifle. "Yes, sir." "This isn't over, Miller," Pearson called as they turned their horses. "That girl belongs to her father. He's got connections all the way to the territorial governor." "She belongs to herself," Benjamin replied evenly. "And she's under my protection now. Remember that if you're foolish enough to return." Only when the riders had disappeared down the trail with Thomas following did Benjamin holster his weapon. He immediately strode toward the house, concern etched on his features. Delilah met him at the door, her face pale. "They were sent by my father," she said unnecessarily. Benjamin nodded, gently guiding her to a chair at the kitchen table. "I gathered as much. Are you all right?" "No," she admitted, her hands trembling. "I never thought he would find me. I was so careful." "Money can uncover many trails," Benjamin said grimly. "Mrs. Abernathy, would you mind giving us a moment?" "Of course." The older woman squeezed Delilah's shoulder reassuringly before stepping outside. When they were alone, Benjamin took a seat across from Delilah. "We need to talk about what happens next." "They'll come back," Delilah said, fear evident in her voice. "My father won't give up. He sees me as property, not a person." "I won't let them take you," Benjamin stated firmly. "But I need to know what you want, Delilah." "Because there's a simple solution, but I won't suggest it unless I know your feelings." She looked at him questioningly. "Marriage," he said simply. "As my wife, you'd have legal protection that a single woman doesn't. Your father's claims would hold little weight against a husband's rights, especially in this territory." Delilah's eyes widened. "You would still marry me, even with this trouble following me?" "I would marry you because I've come to care for you deeply," Benjamin replied, his gaze steady. "The timing is being forced by circumstances, but my feelings are unchanged. In fact, seeing those men threaten what's mine only reinforced them." "What's yours?" she repeated softly. Benjamin's expression softened. "A poor choice of words, perhaps. You're your own person, Delilah, I know that. But I want to protect you, to build a life with you. If you'll have me." Delilah studied his face, the earnest hazel eyes, the strong lines formed by sun and wind, the genuine concern that had been consistent since her arrival. Over the past 2 weeks, he had proven himself to be exactly the man his letters had suggested. Honorable, gentle, and steadfast. "Yes," she said finally, her voice strengthening with certainty. "Yes, Benjamin, I'll marry you." Relief and joy transformed his features. He reached across the table, hesitating before taking her hand. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel pressured by circumstances." "I'm choosing this," she assured him, intertwining her fingers with his. "I'm choosing you." The moment was interrupted by Thomas's return. Benjamin reluctantly released Delilah's hand as his foreman entered the kitchen. "They're headed toward town," Thomas reported. "But I'd bet my last dollar they'll be back with reinforcements." Benjamin nodded grimly. "I think you're right. How many men can we count on if trouble comes?" "The 4 of us for certain. Probably Jenkins and his 2 sons from the neighboring spread. They owe you for helping with that mountain lion last winter. Sheriff Taylor's a fair man, but he's bound by the law. If that girl's father has papers claiming she's incompetent or some such, Taylor might have to honor them." "She's a grown woman who left an abusive home," Benjamin said firmly. "No papers can justify returning her to that." Thomas looked at Delilah apologetically. "Madam, I don't mean to speak as if you're not here, but the law doesn't always protect women as it should." "I understand, Mr. Riley," Delilah replied, "and I appreciate your willingness to stand with Benjamin. We need to move quickly," Benjamin decided. "Thomas, ride to town and fetch Reverend Porter. Tell him it's urgent, and discreetly ask around to see if Pearson and his men are gathering allies." "Will do, boss." Thomas nodded respectfully to Delilah before departing. Benjamin turned back to her. "Delilah, are you truly prepared for this? Marriage today, possibly facing your father's men tomorrow." "I spent 22 years being afraid, Benjamin. I won't live that way anymore." She met his gaze steadily. "I'd rather face whatever comes with you at my side than spend another day under my father's control." Benjamin's expression softened with admiration. "Then let's prepare for a wedding." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Abernathy helped Delilah bathe and dress in her finest clothes, a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. The older woman even produced a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered hastily from around the ranch. "Every bride should have flowers," she declared, arranging them with a ribbon. By late afternoon, Reverend Porter had arrived from Castle Dome, accompanied by Thomas and the town's doctor, who would serve as a second witness. The small party gathered in the main house's living room, where Benjamin waited in his best suit, freshly shaved and visibly nervous. When Delilah entered the room, his face transformed with a smile that warmed her from within. This might not be the wedding of her childhood dreams, arranged in haste to protect her from danger, but looking at Benjamin's sincere expression, she knew she was making the right choice. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Reverend Porter, sensing the gravity of the situation without knowing all the details, spoke eloquently about commitment, protection, and partnership. When Benjamin promised to cherish and protect her, his voice rang with conviction that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "I, Delilah Thompson, take you, Benjamin Miller, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she recited, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips, their first such contact. The touch, though brief, sent an unexpected warmth through Delilah's body. After the ceremony, they shared a small celebratory meal prepared by Mrs. Abernathy. The conversation remained light, though everyone present understood the urgency behind the hasty wedding. As evening approached, Thomas returned from escorting the Reverend and Doctor back toward town with troubling news. "Pearson's gathered at least 6 men at the saloon," he reported grimly. "They're drinking heavily and making threats. Word is they plan to ride out at first light." Benjamin nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we'll be ready for them. Thomas, make sure all the men are armed. Post a guard tonight just in case they decide to come under cover of darkness." "Already arranged, boss." Thomas tipped his hat to Delilah. "Congratulations, Mrs. Miller. Rest assured we'll all stand with you and Benjamin." As darkness fell, the ranch hands took up positions around the property. Benjamin insisted that Delilah move her belongings to the main house, now legitimately her home as his wife. "I've prepared the blue bedroom for you," he said as he carried her trunk upstairs. "It connects to mine through that door, but it locks from your side." He set down the trunk and faced her, his expression serious. "Delilah, I want you to know that while we're legally married, I don't expect. That is, I understand we're still becoming acquainted. The marriage may have been hastened by circumstances, but that doesn't change my promise to give you time." Delilah felt a rush of affection for this man who continually placed her comfort above his own rights. "Thank you, Benjamin. You're a good man." He smiled slightly. "I'm trying to be the man you deserve." That night, Delilah lay awake in her new room, listening to the occasional sounds of the ranch hands patrolling outside. The day's events swirled in her mind: the threat of her father's men, the hasty wedding, her new status as Mrs. Benjamin Miller. By all measures, she should have felt overwhelmed, yet a surprising sense of peace had settled over her. For the first time in her adult life, she felt protected rather than controlled. Dawn broke with no sign of trouble. Benjamin had risen before first light, checking with the night guards before returning to prepare breakfast himself, allowing Mrs. Abernathy to remain safely in town. "No sign of riders," he reported as Delilah joined him in the kitchen. "But that doesn't mean they won't come." "What will happen when they do?" she asked, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. Benjamin's expression was grim but determined. "I'll try to resolve this peacefully. You're my lawful wife now, Delilah. Even if your father has somehow obtained papers claiming authority over you, marriage supersedes those claims in this territory. And if they don't accept that, then we'll defend what's ours." The simple declaration held no bravado, only quiet certainty. They ate breakfast together, the domestic routine oddly normal against the backdrop of impending confrontation. Benjamin insisted that Delilah remain inside the house when riders were spotted approaching around mid-morning. "Stay away from the windows," he instructed, buckling on his gun belt. "If shooting starts, go to the root cellar. The entrance is hidden behind the pantry shelf. Be careful," she said, impulsively catching his hand. "I've only just found you, Benjamin Miller. I'm not ready to lose you." His expression softened, and he brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "I have no intention of leaving my bride so soon." With a reassuring smile, he strode out to meet the threat. From the parlor window, Delilah watched as Pearson and 7 other men rode into the ranch yard. They found Benjamin waiting with Thomas and 3 ranch hands, all armed but with weapons holstered. "That's far enough," Benjamin called when the riders were still 30 yards out. Pearson signaled his men to halt. "We've come for the Thompson girl, Miller. This doesn't have to get messy." "There is no Thompson girl here," Benjamin replied evenly. "My wife, Delilah Miller, is inside our home." Pearson laughed harshly. "A hasty wedding won't change anything. We have papers signed by her father and a Boston judge declaring her mentally incompetent and in need of her father's guardianship. The law's on our side. Those papers, if they even exist, were obtained through fraud," Benjamin countered. "And they hold no weight against a marriage certificate in Arizona territory. My wife is staying right where she is. Her father's offering $500 for her safe return," Pearson said, his voice carrying to where Delilah stood watching. "That's good money, Miller." "Why fight over a woman you barely know?" "Because she's my wife," Benjamin stated simply. "And because no amount of money would persuade me to send a woman back to a man who beat her." The accusation hung in the air. Some of Pearson's men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "That's a serious charge," came a new voice as another rider approached from the direction of town. Delilah recognized Sheriff Taylor, a stern-faced man she'd met briefly during her first visit to Castle Dome. "Sheriff," Benjamin acknowledged with a nod. "I'm glad you're here to witness this." Taylor rode between the 2 groups, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Mr. Pearson here showed me some legal papers from Boston concerning a Miss Thompson, papers that give her father legal authority over her. My wife's name is Delilah Miller now," Benjamin repeated firmly. "We were married yesterday by Reverend Porter with Dr. Wilson as witness. The marriage certificate has been properly filed." "So I've been told," the sheriff agreed, "which complicates matters legally." Pearson spat on the ground. "A convenient marriage to circumvent the law doesn't change the facts. Her father wants her home." "The facts," Benjamin said coldly, "are that Delilah arrived in Castle Dome covered in bruises inflicted by her father. Anyone who saw her that day can testify to it. No legal document gives a man the right to beat his daughter." Sheriff Taylor's expression hardened. "Is that true, Pearson? Was the young woman injured when she fled?" Pearson shifted uncomfortably. "I wouldn't know about that. I'm just doing the job I was paid for." "Well, I do know about it," came Mrs. Abernathy's voice as she emerged from behind the barn, shotgun in hand. "I saw those bruises myself. That poor girl was black and blue from her shoulders to her waist. No decent man would send her back to that. Several of the townsfolk had followed Mrs. Abernathy from their hiding places, Dr. Wilson, Reverend Porter, and 3 other men Delilah recognized from Castle Dome. The doctor himself treated her injuries, Mrs. Abernathy continued, nodding toward Dr. Wilson. "Tell them, doctor." Wilson stepped forward, his dignified bearing lending weight to his words. "As a medical professional, I can confirm that Miss Thompson, Mrs. Miller, now showed evidence of repeated physical abuse when she arrived. In my professional opinion, returning her to her abuser would constitute a severe threat to her well-being." Sheriff Taylor considered this testimony, then turned back to Pearson. "Sounds to me like you've been hired to return a victim to her abuser, Mr. Pearson." "That's not something I can allow in my jurisdiction." "The law," Pearson began. "The law in Arizona Territory recognizes marriage as creating a new family unit," the sheriff interrupted. "And it doesn't recognize the authority of a Boston judge to override that, especially when abuse is credibly alleged." He straightened in his saddle. "Now, you and your men have a choice. Ride away peacefully or face charges of attempted kidnapping and disturbing the peace." The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Delilah held her breath, watching from the window as Pearson weighed his options, noting that he was now outnumbered. Finally, Pearson scowled and reined his horse around. "This isn't worth dying for. Thompson can keep his money." "A wise decision," Sheriff Taylor said evenly. "I'll escort you and your men to the territorial border myself. And Mr. Pearson, don't return to my county. You won't receive such a polite welcome next time." As Pearson and his men departed under the sheriff's watchful eye, Benjamin turned toward the house. His eyes met Delilah's through the window, and the relief in his expression mirrored her own. She rushed outside to meet him, propriety forgotten in the wake of their victory. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "It's over," Benjamin murmured against her hair, his arms encircling her protectively. "You're safe now, truly safe." Looking up at him, Delilah felt the last barriers around her heart begin to crumble. This man had risked everything: his safety, his ranch, his very life to protect her, a woman he barely knew. And he had done it not to possess her, but to free her. "Thank you," she whispered, aware of the onlookers but focusing only on her husband's face. "For everything." His smile was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." In the days that followed, life at the Flying M gradually returned to normal. Sheriff Taylor sent word that Pearson and his men had indeed left the territory, presumably returning to Boston to report their failure to Delilah's father. "He may try again," Benjamin warned as they discussed the matter over dinner one evening. "Men like your father rarely give up easily." "I know," Delilah acknowledged, "but I won't live in fear of him anymore. This is my home now, and I won't let him take it from me." Benjamin reached across the table to take her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them. "Our home," he corrected gently. "And we'll defend it together." Their marriage, though begun in haste, was growing into something genuine. Delilah continued to occupy her separate bedroom, but they spent their days working side by side, Benjamin teaching her about ranch operations, while she managed the accounts and household with increasing confidence. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, or in the library reading aloud to each other from Benjamin's collection of books. These quiet moments of companionship were healing something in both of them: Benjamin's lingering grief over his first wife, Delilah's deep wounds from years of abuse. 1 month after their wedding, Benjamin surprised Delilah with a gift: a beautiful chestnut mare of her own, a gentler, smaller counterpart to his stallion. "She's called Star," he explained as Delilah stroked the horse's velvet nose in wonder. "For the white mark on her forehead." I thought you might like to continue your riding lessons with a mount of your own." "She's beautiful," Delilah breathed. "Thank you, Benjamin." He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "I thought perhaps we might ride together in the evenings when the day's work is done. There's much of the flying you haven't seen yet." Those evening rides became a cherished ritual. As Delilah's confidence on horseback grew, they ventured farther from the ranch house, exploring hidden valleys and scenic overlooks. Benjamin showed her his favorite places on the property: a secluded pond fed by the creek, ancient petroglyphs carved into a canyon wall, a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers after the summer rains. During one such ride, 2 months into their marriage, they stopped at the mesa where Benjamin had first shown her the vista of the Flying M. As they sat side by side watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson, Delilah found the courage to broach a subject that had remained unspoken between them. "Benjamin," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "What about it? We married quickly because of circumstances," she continued, her heart racing. "And you've been so patient, so respectful of my need for time and space." "I meant what I said, Delilah. I'll never rush you or demand more than you're ready to give." She nodded, gathering her courage. "I know, and that's why. That's why I've come to love you." The words hung in the air between them. Benjamin's eyes widened slightly, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "I love you," she repeated more firmly. "Not from gratitude or obligation, but because of the man you are. Kind, honorable, gentle." She smiled slightly. "Stubborn at times, too practical for your own good, and terrible with numbers." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Those don't sound like particularly lovable qualities." "They are to me." Delilah moved closer to him, emboldened by the tenderness in his eyes. "I want to be your wife in every sense, Benjamin, not just in name." Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and cupped her cheek in his calloused palm. "Are you certain, Delilah? There's no hurry." In answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he responded with gentle passion. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, foreheads resting against each other. "I love you, Delilah Miller," Benjamin whispered against her lips. "I think I have since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, bruised but unbroken." That night, for the first time, Delilah unlocked the connecting door between their bedrooms. When Benjamin saw it standing open, his questioning gaze met hers across the threshold. "I'm ready," she said simply, extending her hand to him. He took it reverently, drawing her gently into his embrace. "We'll go slowly," he promised, brushing a tender kiss against her temple. "And if at any point you want to stop, just say the word." But Delilah discovered she didn't want to stop. In Benjamin's careful, loving hands, intimacy became not the fearful submission she had dreaded, but a joyful giving and receiving between equals. His every touch was a question, every caress an invitation rather than a demand. For the first time, she understood that physical love could be beautiful rather than frightening. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Delilah felt tears gathering in her eyes not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming gratitude. "What is it?" Benjamin asked softly, noticing her tears in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I never knew it could be like this," she admitted. "I always thought." She trailed off, unable to express the dread that had haunted her. "I know," he murmured, understanding without explanation. "But it will always be like this between us, Delilah. Equal, respectful, loving." She believed him completely. As autumn painted the Arizona landscape in subtle golds and russets, Delilah found herself fully embracing her role as mistress of the Flying M. The ranch hands, initially awkward around their boss's new wife, had warmed to her as she proved herself hardworking and fair. Mrs. Abernathy had transitioned from employee to friend, teaching Delilah the skills she needed to manage the household while respecting her natural abilities. Benjamin had started including her in all aspects of ranch business, valuing her sharp mind and perspective. When drought threatened the northern pastures, it was Delilah who proposed redirecting the creek using a series of irrigation channels, a solution that saved a significant portion of their grazing land. "Where did you learn about irrigation?" Benjamin asked in amazement as they surveyed the successful project. "Books," she replied with a smile. "Your library has several volumes on agriculture and water management. I've been studying them." He shook his head in wonder. "Remind me again why a brilliant woman like you agreed to marry a simple rancher." "Because this simple rancher is the finest man I've ever known," she answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Their happiness seemed complete, yet as winter approached, Delilah found herself facing an unexpected challenge. Her monthly cycle, always regular, had failed to appear for the second consecutive month. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. She confided her suspicions to Mrs. Abernathy, who confirmed what Delilah already suspected. "The symptoms are all there, child," the older woman said kindly. "The fatigue, the queasiness in the mornings, the tenderness. You're carrying Benjamin's child." "I'm afraid," Delilah admitted, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I become like my father? What if I don't know how to love a child properly?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened with compassion. "The very fact that you're asking that question tells me you'll never be like him. You know the difference between discipline and cruelty, between guidance and control. You'll be a wonderful mother, Delilah." That evening, after supper, Delilah asked Benjamin to join her on the porch despite the December chill. Wrapped in blankets, they sat in their usual rocking chairs, watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness. Benjamin turned to her, concern immediately apparent in his expression. "What is it?" "Are you unwell?" "Not unwell exactly." Delilah took a deep breath. "Benjamin, I'm going to have a baby, our baby. In early summer, Mrs. Abernathy thinks." For a moment, Benjamin sat perfectly still, his expression frozen. Then, to Delilah's surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "A baby," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You're certain?" she nodded, watching his face anxiously. "Are you?" Pleased in answer, Benjamin slid from his chair to kneel before hers, gathering her hands in his. "Please doesn't begin to describe it, Delilah. I'm overwhelmed, grateful, terrified." He laughed shakily. "A father, I'm going to be a father." "And I'm going to be a mother," she said, still wrestling with the enormity of it. "I'm scared, Benjamin. What if I don't know how to be a good parent? I didn't exactly have the best example." He squeezed her hands gently. "We'll learn together. And you, Delilah Miller, have the biggest, kindest heart of anyone I've ever known. Our child will be blessed to have you as a mother." His faith in her, so absolute and unwavering, eased Delilah's fears. Together, they would build the family neither of them had experienced in their own childhoods, one founded on love, respect, and gentleness. Word of Delilah's pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch and nearby Castle Dome. The community that had rallied to protect her from her father's men now showered her with support of a different kind: baby blankets, tiny clothes, advice both solicited and unsolicited. Benjamin threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness. He insisted on converting the bedroom nearest theirs into a nursery, personally crafting a cradle from Arizona pine. When Delilah found him sanding the wood late one night, His dedication brought tears to her eyes. "My father never would have done anything like this," she observed, watching his careful work. Benjamin looked up, sawdust in his hair. "Then our child will know a different kind of father, one who builds rather than destroys." As her body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Delilah marveled at Benjamin's continuing tenderness. He treated her with a reverence that never felt stifling, attentive to her needs without being overprotective. When her back ached from the growing weight of their child, he would massage it gently in the evenings. When unusual cravings struck at odd hours, he would ride to Castle Dome without complaint to fulfill them. Spring brought new life to the flying calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and the increasingly active movements of the child within Delilah's womb. Benjamin took to speaking to her rounded belly each night, telling the baby stories about the ranch and promises for the future. "Your mama is the bravest person I know," he would say, his hand splayed protectively over their growing child. "And you're going to be just as strong and smart as she is." "Not if you keep telling the poor child such tall tales," Delilah would protest, but secretly she treasured these moments. As her due date approached in early June, Benjamin insisted on bringing Dr. Wilson to stay at the ranch, unwilling to risk Delilah being without medical care when her time came. The doctor was installed in one of the guest rooms, his presence both reassuring and slightly nerve-wracking as they waited for the baby's arrival. The day finally came during a spectacular Arizona sunset. Delilah's labor began just as the sky erupted in brilliant orange and crimson, a drama that seemed fitting for the momentous occasion. Mrs. Abernathy and Dr. Wilson took charge with calm efficiency, while Benjamin paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, periodically shooed away by Mrs. Abernathy when he attempted to enter. After 6 hours of labor, as the stars emerged in the clear night sky, their son was born, a robust boy with his father's hazel eyes and a powerful set of lungs that announced his arrival to the entire household. When Benjamin was finally allowed into the room, his face was a study in awe as he approached the bed where Delilah lay holding their swaddled son. "He's perfect," Benjamin whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gazed at the tiny features. "Just like his mother." Delilah smiled through her exhaustion. "Would you like to hold your son?" With reverent care, Benjamin gathered the baby into his arms, his large hands suddenly impossibly gentle. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." Watching them together, her husband cradling their newborn son with such tender wonder, Delilah felt a completeness she had never imagined possible when she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Castle Dome a year earlier, her body bruised and her spirit nearly broken. "What shall we name him?" Benjamin asked, returning to sit beside her on the bed, their son nestled between them. Delilah had been considering this for months. "I thought perhaps William, after your father. William Thomas Miller." Benjamin's expression softened with emotion. "William Thomas, it's a fine name, a strong name." He touched the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger with surprising strength. "Welcome to the Flying William Thomas Miller. You are so very loved." In that moment, surrounded by her husband and son in the home they had built together, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that the marks of her past had truly ended. The bruises had faded from her skin long ago, but now the deeper wounds had healed as well, replaced by the indelible marks of love, family, and belonging. The years that followed brought more children to the Flying a daughter named Margaret Rose 2 years after William, and twins, Robert James and Elizabeth Ann, 3 years after that. Each birth reinforced the sacred bond between Benjamin and Delilah, strengthening a partnership that had begun in unusual circumstances, but had grown into one of the territory's most admired marriages. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Benjamin's knowledge of cattle and land, combined with Delilah's sharp business acumen, made the Flying M one of the most successful operations in the territory. They expanded their holdings, built a larger home to accommodate their growing family, and became pillars of the community as Castle Dome grew from a dusty outpost into a proper town. Thomas Riley eventually married a schoolteacher who came to Castle Dome, settling on a parcel of land that Benjamin and Delilah gifted them as a wedding present. Mrs. Abernathy remained a beloved fixture at the Flying M until her peaceful passing at the age of 72, surrounded by the family that had adopted her as their own. Delilah never heard from her father again. Whether Pearson had convinced him to abandon his pursuit or whether other circumstances intervened, she never knew. The fear of his reappearance gradually faded, replaced by the confidence of knowing she was surrounded by a community and family that would protect her at all costs. As for Benjamin and Delilah, their love deepened with each passing year. The mail-order arrangement that had brought them together became a family legend, a story they shared with their children as they grew old enough to understand. "Your father saved me," Delilah would tell them, her hand clasped firmly in Benjamin's even after decades of marriage. "No," Benjamin would correct gently, with the same tenderness that had never diminished. "We saved each other." And in the twilight of their lives, as they watched their grandchildren play in the same fields where they had once ridden together as newlyweds, they knew it was true. The frightened young woman and the lonely rancher had found in each other not just safety or companionship, but the rarest of gifts, a love that had healed them both, erasing old scars and replacing them with memories of a life well lived together.